thank you everyone for joining today. It's great that so many of you could attend this webinar today. This is a need to know session, so it's going to be 30 minutes in length, and we're going to cover a very topical area that broke over the summer related to car allowances and national insurance, and a potential opportunity to reclaim national insurance on car allowances. Now, my name's Ian Goodwin. I'm a partner at Mazar, working in the employment taxes space, and I'm joined by my colleagues Abby and Ian Prescott today, who are going to talk through some of the questions and queries we have had from clients since July on this issue, and to help you get an understanding of whether this is something that's relevant to yourselves and what the potential size of a potential reclaim might be for your business and your employees as well. As I said, it's going to be a 30-minute need-to-know bite-sized session. You're very welcome to use the Q&A box and ask questions in advance as we go through the session, and we have had some questions that people have put through while you were registering as well, so thank you for those. Now, to start us off, what I thought would be useful was to just give a bit of an introduction as to why we are here today and what we are talking about. Well, this relates to a tribunal case that was the Lango Rourke Wilmot Dixon case against HMRC that was found in favour of the taxpayer. HMRC had an opportunity to appeal until the 4th of September, but chose not to, and therefore they are not appealing this decision. So this has meant that there has been a national insurance reclaim for those two businesses, and potentially, because other businesses may have a similar fact pattern, there may be a national insurance reclaim for your businesses as well. This will be where you've got two things. You've got payments of car allowances through payroll to employees instead of them getting a company car. And you've also paid them business mileage at less than 45 pence per mile. So you may have used the company car advisory fuel rates, or you may have just used a flat amount in that instance, say 15p, 20p, 25p per mile. It's the difference between that 45p per mile and what was paid, that's where the reclaim comes in. So what I wanted to do just to start with, before we move on to the questions that Abby and Ian are going to answer, I thought it'd be useful just to show a slide of the potential reclaim opportunity that you may have in this regard. Now, what we have here is a slide just showing the difference if you've given a car allowance to 1 employee, 10 employees, 100 employees, or 500 employees, on the basis that they have done 15,000 miles at 20p per mile, and they received a car allowance of £6,000 per year. As we'll see, the savings are based on employee and employer national insurance. We've used 2% for the employee NIC reclaim. It potentially might be 12% for some employees, depending on what their earnings were, whether they were above the upper earnings limit, which is about £50,000 a year now. And the employer NIC is based at the 13.8%. And we'll obviously see the more employees that receive the car allowance, the more the NIC reclaim potentially would be, which is pretty obvious in that circumstance there. Now, the last column talks about the total over 6 years. We've used 6 years because it's understood that we can go back 6 years, even though that is up for debate at the moment as to whether that might be a little bit longer than 6 years on a reasonable excuse basis. But that seems a prudent way of looking at the numbers as a starting point. We've got an article and an FAQ already on our website, and also a form that you can complete to provide us with some details if you'd like us to do a basic calculation for you to establish what the size of any reclaim may be for you where you fit the criteria. And ultimately, there's going to be a case-by-case basis to establish if any claim that you may have matches up to what has gone through that case law, and whether HMRC will be allowing any reclaim opportunities for that. But to help with that discussion, I thought it's probably best to share some of the queries we've had from clients, and I'm going to go to my colleagues now, Ian and Abby, to talk through some of those. So if we remove the slide from the screen, and we'll have an open discussion on that, and feel free to ask questions as we go through this as well. So thank you again for joining me, Abby and Ian. And I think we're going to start with yourself, Ian, on this. So one thing that we have been asked is, you know, who is this opportunity relevant for, And why haven't I heard of this before? I had that question back in August, I think, from a client. You're on mute, Ian. Someone has to be.
Hi, great question, Ian, and thanks for the intro. So yeah, who's the opportunity relevant for? I think, as you said, it has to be an employer who has paid the car allowance and additionally paid employees mileage rates at lower than the AMAP rate. So there's a potential repayment there. Where's it come from? It's been a long-running saga since 2010, 2012, when HMRC has been disputing whether the car allowance was a relevant motor expense for national insurance purposes. A case was settled in 2012, but it didn't set a precedent. But as you say, the two recent cases have now given us the opportunity to take those repayments forward. So the landscape has completely changed on NIC historical reclaims. So opportunities are there where we have got less than 45 pence paid by employers in association with that car allowance, which is now a relevant motor expense.
And just on relation to that car allowance, and that's a car allowance that's gone through payroll and subject to tax.
It has, yeah. So we've had a deduction of pay as you earn and national insurance. Obviously, if we've not got the national insurance paid on it, we wouldn't be able to now reclaim this bit of national insurance from those car allowances.
Thank you. And that relates, just lastly, Ian, that relates to business mileage that individuals have had from going, say, to a temporary workplace, for instance.
Yeah, so yeah, lots of criteria to tick first on that it's genuine business mileage that's allowable under HMRC legislation and guidance.
That's great. Thank you for that, Ian. Abby, moving on to yourself, what does a client need to think about to consider if they have a potential claim here?
So I think in the first instance, you just have to consider whether you have paid car allowances. If you have they been subject to pay as you earn and Class 1 NIC, like Ian said? And also, have you reimbursed or paid for business mileage at a rate of less than 45 pence per mile or the approved AMAP rate? If you have both of those, then a claim could be relevant.
And I think, Abby, would it be fair to say, are HMRC going to be, opening the floodgates and just paying back money willy-nilly here?
I very much doubt it. I suspect there'll be quite strict criteria that you have to meet, but in the first instance, if you have both of those, then there is the potential for a claim and something to consider going forward.
And just suppose, Ian, just focusing on the case itself, was there anything in the Lango Rourke and Wilmot Dixon case that we need to focus on, or that's important for listeners on the call today to be aware of?
Yeah, I think our previous experiences with HMRC, even though they've lost the case, tells us that we're expecting certain challenges around potentially making these claims. And I think it's around where you said whether these are genuine business mileage. So HMRC would expect us to stress test any type of claims that we put in, and ensure that they're completely compliant with legislation and guidance before they would ever consider taking us back. I think we also need to consider that as it's a national insurance claim, HMRC may want us to make the claims in pay periods rather than annual periods for payments, as national insurance works on periods worked rather than annualized.
That's great, Ian. I think I suppose thinking about this going forward for businesses that I think they might have a claim, Abby, what kind of advice would you give them as to how to proceed with making a claim to HMRC?
So once you've established if a claim could be in point, then our advice would be to submit a protective claim to HMRC as early as possible. That will protect your time from now. It's sort of it's a ticking clock here, really. So once we get the protective claim, that will be just sort of opening the initial correspondence with HMRC, just providing very brief details to which you can then work in the background and follow up once you've heard back from HMRC, just to see how they're going to react to this, and provide a more detailed claim then.
I think it's fair to say, Abby, there that the limited information, it will still be important to do a review of contracts, documentation that sets out why a car allowance has been paid, and also a bit of a sample payslip, mileage claim review, and not go into obviously the nth degree of detail, because it's pointless wasting hundreds of hours of time to send HMRC across a major calculation at this stage until HMRC have shown a few more cards at their side as to how they're going to approach this for these claims on a case-by-case basis. So we're in dialogue with HMRC to try and find out what that will look like and how we can make this as efficient as possible. But like Abby said, I think from my perspective, it's going to be, getting that detail to make an initial protective claim as soon as possible, so we can start having that dialogue with HMRC and providing some information to them as to why your claim, sits alongside the ones that has been found in favour of the taxpayer in the recent tribunal case. I think just one of the questions we've also had, Ian, is obviously this has been very much focused on retrospective action. What's happened, what we need to take place historically, which is of primary importance. But what's the future here? What should employers be thinking about? And what are the things we need to be aware of and mindful of wider probably discussions that are taking place?
Yeah, another great question, Ian. Unfortunately, I'm not Mystic Meg. I haven't got the crystal ball, but as you know, we've been having lots of discussions around this. Our feeling from experience is that HMRC may look to change the legislation going forward. So I would say keep an eye on the autumn statement, which is due in the next couple of months. They may just mention it rather than have a swift change and have a consultation. But yeah, it's definitely one to watch. We've been linking in with legal colleagues who are looking out whether going forward we can restrict national insurance payments from these new mileage payments going forward. They're looking from a perspective to see whether it's an unlawful withholding, and again, that's all a work in progress. So it's kind of watch this space and keep in contact with us if you're unsure on any facts, and we can update you as we learn things from HMRC and our legal colleagues as well.
I think there, Ian, you're right. It's important to focus on the retrospective position, because national insurance has been paid on those car allowances. So, employers have been compliant there. Going forward, it's going to require some necessary dialogue with HMRC and potential updates. So we're not saying, change your system straight away to get maximum national insurance relief, because it's not yet sure what that looks like. And I know that in lawful deduction point is something lawyers are looking at as well at the moment, because that was something that was referenced as part of the case and the aftermath of the case as well. So it's something we are helping organisations with, looking at the travel and reward strategy for the future, as well as that retrospective claim position, and helping organisations get those protective claims in after doing some initial analysis on what the potential reclaim opportunity might be, and whether your potential reclaim stacks up by looking at various documentation and pay slips, etc. there too. I think that's been really useful as a starting point. Now, I know we're only 15 minutes through, because we want to leave lots of time for your questions, and I've seen there's been a good number that have been coming through. But before we get on to them, what I thought would be useful is whether if Abby and Ian could just provide what their key takeaway from this would be. So if I start with yourself, Ian, what would be your key takeaway from this potential opportunity?
I think my best advice and key takeaway would be act early. If you think you've got a potential claim, obviously use our website to help you out. Make the claim early. The 6 years is an ever decreasing window, unless we can extend that window. So yeah, get your claims in early. Talk to us. Use the tool which we've provided, It's all there to help you to see whether you can get some money back from HMRC. And just on a final point, all monies that you get back will be due interest, which is an additional bonus.
Mine is probably similar to Ian's. Consider your position now and act as soon as possible to avoid missing out. It's not very often we get money back, so it's good to act early.
Agreed. And it's usually national insurance where there's something to look at, and this is, I think, for me, an opportunity for clients to, really look at it. As I say, HMRC are not going to be paying out money willy-nilly, so it is going to be case-by-case basis and making sure you've got the right facts that stack up here. And I think to answer some of those questions here, we've had a large number of questions that have come in during this session, so I'm going to move on to them without any further ado. Now, one question we've been asked a few times, and I'm going to direct this to yourself, Ian, is 45p a mile. What about the 25p a mile? What about these 10,000 miles? What happens with national insurance here?
Okay. A really good opportunity, because there's a quirk in the national insurance regulations which say, unlike tax, there is only one effective rate for national insurance on a mileage, and it's always set at the highest rate. So it will sit at 45 pence and will not reduce once we get over 10,000 miles. So anyone who's got additional higher rate mileage will benefit from this, having the national insurance rate claimed back at 45 pence for every mile traveled.
I suppose to be clear there, Ian, if we've had an employer that has paid a car allowance to employees, paid them 45p a mile for the first 10,000 miles, but 25p thereafter, and they've got a large number of employees that have done over 10,000 miles, there's potentially a reclaim opportunity there as well.
There is, yeah. There's still a potential. So don't think you've not got a reclaim. Either use the tool or come and talk to us, and we can advise you, see if there's anything there for you to get back.
That's great. On I suppose on this, Abby, for what is the key criteria? I know we're repeating ourselves here, but what are the key criteria that people need here to potentially have a reclaim opportunity?
So the first criteria is that you must have paid a car allowance that has been subject to pay as you earn in the Class 1 NIC. The second criteria is that you have paid for business mileage at a rate of less than 45 pence per mile. So in order to reclaim the NIC, you have to have originally paid the NIC, and the way that has been paid is on the car allowance.
And I think it's fair to say, Abby, that where employers have only got one or two employees for a short period of time, you probably need to think about whether it's worthwhile making a claim. Yeah.
So I would run some numbers, so to speak, and have a look and consider whether the claim is feasible for you. And if it is, then it's certainly something worthwhile exploring.
And I think that there's been a question coming, Abby, that I know we had a client call last week together when I was up in Glasgow around if an employer has provided their employees with a fuel card and they've got a personal vehicle, can they make a reclaim here?
Yes, potentially. There's sort of different aspects to look at. So depending on how you have reported the fuel card to HMRC, there is the potential for a Class 1A NIC repayment, as well as the Class 1 NIC on the car allowance. But we need to sort of iron out the details and see how HMRC are going to react in that case. But in theory, yeah, it should also work.
One of the other questions we've had come in, Ian, and this is probably getting into some of the nuts and bolts of the case, is what sort of car allowance drivers might this be relevant for? Is it those business need? Is it perk? Is it something else? What did we see from the case here? Is there some people excluded, or do we need to look at the documentation?
Well, we do need to look at the documentation, but part of the case said that employees wouldn't be excluded. It was still a relevant motor expense as long as we paid tax and national insurance on the allowance.
That's great. I've had a question about I've had a number of questions about how do we enter a protective claim? How would that work? Ian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think it's putting our head above the parapet. I think we need to ensure it's going to the right area within HMRC. That's really important with our recent clashes with HMRC, that it's going to the wrong people, and it might sit there for 6 months not doing anything. I don't think we have to put too much information in. We have to tell HMRC which we're making the claim under the recent cases that have come and that legislation. We don't need to go into the detail of the numbers. We may need to provide details of what information we've got up to back up that claim, but it's all going to be high level at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think from my perspective, that this protective claim is almost a three-pronged process, I would say. One is to do a bit of a calculation, and feel free to use our questionnaire to start that process, because we can provide you with an analysis of what the savings reclaim could look like. The second piece is to get in a protective claim, which will be a short letter to HMRC setting out why we're making a protective claim, and then entering into dialogue with them from there to then, spend more time, because there'll be more preparation, to go through all the detail and set out the quantum for the claim in a detailed application to HMRC for the potential employees who this applies to. So you've got those three-stage process, and getting a small protective claim letter in, and we're helping clients with that at the moment, and doing a review of whether it's relevant as well. That's probably the first thing to start with before you then enter into more detailed assessments and applications, setting out, your quantum for the claim.
Yeah, I would just comment, Ian, that it's probably very similar to a voluntary disclosure for an employer, where the employer wants to declare some income that they've not paid income tax on, but it's the reverse in this situation, where we're declaring income that we would like a reclaim on.
Yeah, because I think in that, what we find is we do a Houston, we have a problem letter, don't we, to start with, Ian, there, to say we'll be in touch. And the reason why we do that is to not, if HMRC came in the interim, potentially it would be a prompted disclosure then, rather than unprompted. So you'd have potential higher penalties to pay. Whereas, like you say, with this, it's the reverse. We go early, we protect the years, because, we're aware there's 6 years, and we're aware COVID is during this period. So the longer we wait, the potential for claims to fall out of time is greater. So I think it's important we get that in as soon as possible as a starting point. I think just a couple of other questions, Abby. One for yourself here that we've had. What about people who've got company cars?
So they are slightly different in that you wouldn't have paid the class 1 NIC on. They would have only paid income tax on the benefit in kind. So for those employees, there's no reclaim available, because you've not paid the NIC in the first place.
And I think it's fair to say there, Abby, as well, isn't it, that where you've got employees that had a car allowance, and I've seen this a number of times, and they've then sacrificed that car allowance for a company car, then that won't apply, because they've got a company vehicle. So this opportunity is only for people that drive their own vehicles, personal vehicle, had a car allowance that's been subject to pay as you earn, and then receive less than 45p per mile for all or some of their mileage.
Yeah, so if the employee is responsible for the maintenance, etc., of the car, and it is their car, then that applies. If it's the employer who is responsible for the maintenance of the car and it's a company car, it won't apply.
That's great. And I think the one thing I've had a few questions on outside of this call as well is electric vehicles. Does this apply? Well, yes, it does. If it's an electric personal vehicle, same criteria applies. If it's an electric company car, then just as Abby has explained, it won't apply, because it's a company vehicle rather than a personal vehicle. So I think it's important to make that point. The other point I just wanted to make here is that, employees if they've been paid less than 45p a mile and driven their personal car, they should have been making tax relief claims anyway to HMRC, either through self-assessment or via Form P87. If they've not been doing that, there's a good opportunity for them to today, or whenever they've got time, to write to HMRC and make sure they get their tax relief back personally, because that's something they will do personally. There's no kind of way of them getting the national insurance back personally, so that needs to be directed through this claim via the employer in those instances at the moment. So, you know, tax relief, they can do that as soon as possible, and it might be a good thing to start talking to your employees as well to see whether they have made tax relief claims, because that might give them a few pounds extra before Christmas potentially if they haven't. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Ian?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, make the claims if they've not already done so. It's a feel-good factor just to highlight to your employees and just ensure that they've made it if they've not. There's lots of information on how to do those claims.
Agreed. And the claim is for both employee and employer national insurance. I know we use 2% in our example, but it will depend on how much income the employee receives. You've got the car allowance, it may be 12% if they receive less than the upper earnings limit for their income for that year as to the reclaim for themselves, or it could be 2% like we set out in the initial slide at the very start of this process as well. I think that's answered the majority of the questions. I know we've got 3 minutes left, so I just wanted to really thank everyone on this call, all the attendees for their fabulous questions, but Abby and Ian for their comments and sharing all the insight they have had as well. That's been very much appreciated throughout this session. And also the fact that if you do want to talk about this, we are on hand to help you. Like I said, we've got the FAQs articles, and feel free to email any of us as well. We'll have our details that will be emailed out to you after this call as well. And obviously this has been recorded as part of a recorded session, so you can share it with relevant colleagues as we go along. And if there's anything else you want to ask, please get in touch. It's no problem at all. So thank you for sparing 30 minutes of your day with us. It's greatly appreciated, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.